I think people perhaps made the conclusion that all problems in software development become abstracted away and solved by AI, which is not true. But
You must have seen some radical changes over the last few years. Things have really shifted in the software world. What have you witnessed, Joe?
you can, whether you see this in case studies or even conversations I've had with friends that are at Fortune 5 type companies, they all have big initiatives going on. They're going top down, not bottom up. They're talking about AI readiness. They're talking about business process mapping. They're talking about AI governance, and they're talking about how this is going to lead to not just the augmentation of workflows, but the total transformation of sort of reimagining of what even workflows exist and how they look. The biggest players are doing this.
AI, is it hype or help? G'day and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Pete Cooper, and our topic is AI, hype or help. Today's guest is Joe Lewinsky from Nuvocode Technologies. Joe is a long-time software developer. He came out of Silicon Valley, spent time over there, and has seen the change from pre-AI to where we are now and using AI, particularly how it relates to unfolding the potential of AI in businesses. So let's get into it. G'day, Joe. How you doing?
Hey, Pete, doing great. How are you?
Yeah, good. Welcome to our show, our podcast. So Joe Lewinsky from Nuvocode Technologies. Joe, tell us a little bit about your business to start things off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting question because it's been a bit of a moving target over the time since I established Nuvocode. Originally, so my background, I've spent about 12 years, a little bit more in software engineering, and I used to work in New York and San Francisco, mostly in the startup ecosystems there. And back in say about 2025 or so, I had gone independent. I had founded Nuvocode Technologies with the intention of having something of just a more garden variety agency. The thing was, of course, is that was not destined to be, because the advent of AI, and really the advent of AI coming into a broader set of companies than simply being the domain of technology, that was co-occurring as I was in the midst of my agency work. And so what this really led to was a situation where that even in the middle of last year, it was kind of more business as usual for software development projects, and AI was sort of being murmured about. There was different sort of applications for it that were finding their way in small ways into projects. And then I would say about Q4 of last year, and certainly at the beginning of the current year, it just exploded. And all AI was that anybody ever wanted to talk about. AI was the central piece of every project that that I was discussing with potential clients. And so the focus really became to focus around sort of like enabling these AI implementations. And I guess maybe sort of foreshadowing a bit, I think a lot of my current work has come out of sort of trying to help companies sort of understand what good AI looks like. How do you actually make it work for you? Because
Right.
I think that everyone by this point has heard sort of AI horror stories, or just sort of uninspiring outcomes that fail to deliver. And I had noticed these myself, and I realized that there's a sort of not just an implementation sort of challenge that needs to occur, but there's also an educational sort of challenge and organizational challenge that pertains to AI that a lot of my work focuses around now.
Okay, interesting. So enabling AI implementations, I think, was the key thing that you said in there. Now, if I was to break that down a little bit, there's a need to write some software or to use AI to write some software which brings about some change to a business or I mean, you focused mainly on businesses, right? Helping businesses transform with AI. Okay. Very close to my heart, that idea and that enablement. So take us through if you have any recent example, just take us through without naming names, what that really looks like so we can sort of ground that down for our audience.
Yeah, exactly. So the my world typically, historically, until roughly this year, was really focused around implementation work. However, AI is a little bit different because the patterns and the system itself, it's very fundamentally different from a lot of the software that had existed before. A lot of software is it's ones and zeros, it's discrete, it's deterministic. AI is inherently probabilistic.
Mm.
Um, though it's not quite that simple, but it's easy to think about these things in these two ways, and
Right.
that implies that there's a whole bunch of different paradigms and design patterns that need to exist for it. And of course, it depends on consuming a great amount of data. And so what happens here is that, because it's a probabilistic system, we have the infamous hallucinations. Now, hallucinations, while they are inherent to AI systems, there are ways to mitigate them, and there are ways to catch them when they're doing so in ways that allow you to do so quickly enough to actually have, return on investment. But in order to even get to that point, there's also something that we talk about is like AI readiness. And that's a bit of a domain unto its own. It pertains to things like data hygiene. How clean is the data, within your sort of your data ecosystem within your organization. There's sort of like data unification. How well is all this data able to be brought together through one sort of layer and understood mutually across all those layers? And then there's also a really important step, which I see, I think is a little bit of the frontier right now, which is the business process mapping that has to be done around any given automation.
Mm. Mm.
And because that is going to distill down into what we call the AI governance layer. Because it's one thing for AI to do things, but it's equally as important. I'd probably say even more important about how that AI, agent or pipeline does what it does.
Mm.
Things like what access does it have? When should it take a particular action? When should it check back and do something else? It's like all these things are, being able to determine what those things are different from case to case,
Mm.
and they all distill down from that business process mapping.
So
So yeah.
if you had an engagement with a client, you would do some element of discovery first to see where perhaps AI could give them some advantage, right? Because I think we were alluding to something which has become clear to me is that over the last few years, we've seen a lot of, I guess, promise from AI. Like it seems to be able to do amazing things. And then I also see uh, everybody being an expert, and what they're being an expert at is going to ChatGPT, getting a kangaroo's head on a rabbit's body, and now that was the morning. In the afternoon, they're down the pub being an expert. Right? Not
Yes.
particularly useful, fun, shows capability, but when it comes to going into businesses, you have to affect their revenues, their costs or risks or some kind of future mitigation, right? So um, it needs to be analyzed really what the business is doing first, right? So is that part of what you do?
Yes, absolutely. I would argue that, this is at least from where I stand as, someone that's been in technology for a very long time. I would argue that that sort of that AI readiness step, some of that preparation, that preparatory work that goes into the laying the groundwork for building some particular automation, I would argue that's more important even than the implementation step.
Yeah.
While that's important, I would say that if you get the preparatory steps right, all the AI readiness stuff correct, the system design, it maybe not go so far as to say it's trivial, but it's at this point there is an understanding around that and how to achieve it, and it's fairly from someone in my position, it's fairly straightforward to distill that into a system which can perform as the client would like it to perform.
So if we were to take maybe a recent example of a particular company you've worked with, how long does it take to get that preparatory work done? And what does that actually look like?
It really varies case to case because the thing that I'm really finding and that I found very challenging about this space right now is that different companies, at different scales, at different levels of sort of their appetite for technology and are really at different places in the conversation. There's a prospective client that I'm speaking to right now in the cybersecurity space. They already are well down the road. They can almost start at a place where you're talking almost at a system design level. On the other hand, another client that I happen to be working with, they have much of their business very well defined, a lot of their processes exquisitely defined. However, the actual the mapping of how that then will translate into a system is a little bit less defined, and that work still needs to be performed. So then, if you move further back, I've had conversations with some colleagues in sort of mid-market finance where the firms they're a part of are much more conservative, and there is just more, they're still in the stage where we bought a bunch of Copilot seats. We gave everybody Copilot, and they're using it in a very bottom-up fashion to enable their own sort of or augment their own daily workflows. But there's not a broader vision. There's sort of like they're not even really clear where to start. And so they're even pre that AI readiness conversation. It's more or less just almost like educating about like sort of the problem space that they're
Mm,
going to face next.
mm.
So the conversation really, really differs widely. And I think that'll collapse down in the next coming years as the information and the understanding starts to propagate more widely. But right now, it's a very heterogeneous sort of environment in that respect.
So, I guess there's a sort of fundamentally assumed level of knowledge, right? I know some people in business who have not even turned on an LLM, right? They have no interest really in it. They don't really use a computer much. Their business is done perhaps through, meetings, through their presence, driving to various sites and networking, and it's very much people focused. They know AI is out there, obviously, but they really don't know the leverage that it can give. And I would say I sort of go from 0 to 5. I would say it's a level 0. Someone who hasn't turned on an LLM is at a level 0. Their awareness is probably so low that they don't even realize that there's a potential to do anything with their business. But once you start going up the levels and people start to say, oh, well, I'm using an LLM now and it's helping me do my reports, it's helping me do my research, it's giving me time advantage. Oh, well, if it's helping me, maybe I should roll it out across the organization. So, next thing you know, there's everybody else using the LLMs, as you said. I think you said from the bottom up, and they're all using it. I would call that level 1 level, but there's nothing pulling anything together to really leverage it. And we know that AI has the capacity to do that. Would you agree with my sort of level 0 and level 1 there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very, very well characterized. And I would kind of highlight there's something maybe kind of hidden in there, and that's sort of that level wise description is what a challenging information environment I think this is for people to make sense because they're what they perceive can be done with AI. It really maps to the level they're at, but they're what they believe can be done with AI, it doesn't move in linear fashion as their understanding grows. They might be at level 1 and be like, oh my God, this it's going to change everything. But then I find that people at like level 2 and 3 get to this point where it's like, this is all smoke and mirrors. There's nothing here. This is, I can't use this for anything. It's like this, this just, it made factual errors in a report I tried to generate with it, even after I gave it a perfectly clean data sheet. It's like this will never work. But, so it's the complete opposite opinion at that level 3. But then as you move beyond that, then you start to see that you're like, wait, no, 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 no. There's a there, and there's ways to actually to solve those problems that were encountered at sort of that level 3 understanding. And anyway, it's very interesting, but I
Mm.
have a lot of sympathy for people that are sort of ascending that curve and trying to make sense of it because it's not widespread in terms of the truth of it all and why it is the truth. But
Mm.
nevertheless, yeah, it is the case. I think with the way you describe it is accurate.
So I like where we're going with this, and I think there's a fundamental piece that we all need to understand about what an LLM actually is. It's essentially a massive pattern recognition machine, right? It's just
Mhm.
taken enormous amounts of data and it's looking for patterns. And as you said, it's probability. So, and it's finishing the end of a sentence. So the cat sat on the, mat, or the cat sat on the dog, and it will say, "Oh, most likely it's the cat," and then it does the next word and the next word, next word. If you kind of synthesize all that up, to me, where it's kind of pushing everything to a kind of mean point, like a distributed mean point, where everything is migrating towards a common point. But nobody is Mr. Average. No business is perfectly average.
Yes.
So there's always going to be this misfit between, oh, well, I'm not a normal business. Nobody is. I'm somewhere down here. And if you happen to be right out on the extremes, you're going to be a long way from the average, and you're going to get a worse result than if you're closer to the middle.
Mhm.
Do you think that makes sense?
Yeah, and this is actually I'm glad you touched on this because I think this is sort of one of the when I think about some of the deeper philosophical um, points that get raised with sort of the advent of AI. I think it's this exactly what you pointed to with sort of this that that AI it's an average path finder that it finds its way through nodes of
Mm,
probability. I mean, maybe perhaps not strictly the average, but the average within the context
mm.
of where it is. And it's interesting because I think that yes, it does inherently then push us towards averages, and I think that there are one of the challenges, we think about what is AI not good for. And one of the things that I think that is specifically not is making a direct prediction about what lays over the horizon.
Right.
And I think there's a Harvard study that came out that kind of talked about some of um, or perhaps it's an MIT study. Either way, they talked about sort of the strategic bias along certain axes that it gets pushed. But what I think this is expressing really is that it's really pushing towards averages. And in my estimation, I think that genius is fundamentally a tail phenomenon, and that it's like that when you want to break that where you're going to find and where advantage is going to be found is going to be have to be in these areas where everybody else isn't looking,
Right.
because that's an information environment that the value has been extracted from. And so like somewhere along some axis, the tail of around that distribution is going to be where the advantage is going to be found.
Yep.
And so I find myself thinking a lot about like how where does the human come back in this new era? And I think it's sort of being able to like to exist outside of like sort of like what the AI and it kind of where it handles sort of the middle and surfaces a lot of insights and can do so very wonderfully
Yep.
and expeditiously. So yeah, but no, it's just an interesting point you raised. It's something that I find myself thinking a lot
Well,
about. Yeah.
I think there's an insight here in that AI can only work on what's currently there in the system. Let's call it the system, the internet. What it can't do is it can't look down a microscope. It can't look down a telescope. And it was those things that happened several hundred years ago with Galileo and others, where they shaped the lens and they looked down a microscope, and all of a sudden they realized there was a whole world that they didn't understand. Back before microscopes, people thought that the thinking was done in your heart, right? But the advent of the microscope enabled us to understand cells and what cells do, and of course we looked out through. I mean, we knew the world was round, but we thought that the sun went around the Earth, and it was through looking through the telescopes that we were able to realize that's the other way around. And people think, well, so what? Where's the relevance to that? Was very relevant to that because if you understand how the universe works, you can understand how GPS works, and therefore you can use your phone to get from A to B. Very, very practical. Can't do it without general relativity and a deep understanding of the science that all goes behind that. And when it comes to looking down the microscope, so many things associated with your health come as a direct result of the fact that we understand how the body works at that level. So these are not abstract pieces of science. These have direct bearings on our lives.
Yes. And
AI is not able, I want to try and say is AI is not able to necessarily go out and find new science in the world, right? It's always going to be whatever is already in the digital space.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of like nuance here because I think that I can already hear that there would be somebody out there saying it's like whoa, 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 hold on now. It's like but there's all these incredible like these AI videos, and there's also we asked Opus to compose a joke, and it was hilarious. You're thinking
Mm.
like it's clear AI is doing creative work, and I think it draws a bit of some attention to like where the difference is here. In that I think that AI has demonstrated something like maybe I won't go so far as to call it sham creativity, but creativity in a recombinant sort of form, where the existing elements, the elements that we know are there, it can recombine them in interesting and even perhaps novel ways that have craft attached to them, but the transformational, the revolutionary, where fundamentally new ground is broken, something akin to the level of like a new art movement, or a new, sort of a fundamentally new branch of science that discovers or explores things that were fundamentally not understood to exist in a meaningful way beforehand. That does not seem to be a capability of it, and it is. Now, while I'm certain that there are probably teams of people, very smart, working on this exact problem, it is not a foregone conclusion that this is possible with the
Yeah.
what AI can do.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think there is this generative component to it too, isn't there? Where it does have a sense of of creating some randomization
Mhm.
that they've built into it, so that it's not directly going to the mean every single time. Otherwise, it just wouldn't be able to function properly.
Right.
And I think that does. I mean, I don't know the science that well, maybe you do, but it seems to me that you're going to trade off hallucinations with the randomness, which drives you away from the mean. So if it's too much generation, there's too much randomness, you're going to start having more hallucinations, or
Mhm.
you're going to have everything's going to migrate to the mean across everything, and everyone's going to be doing exactly the same thing. And I guess philosophically, we become a hive mind, like we're all thinking the same thing because that's all we know, and it's just fed back to us again and again and again.
Yes. Yeah, that's it's funny. And that process I think was already kind of underway a bit even before the advent of AI. I
It
think with things
is,
like,
yes,
the global social media and everything. It's been
exactly.
a
I
long
was
time
thinking
since
the
we've
same
had,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
cycle after cycle of mean averaged sort
yeah,
of content that we've
yeah,
consumed and
yeah.
then created new content on top of.
100%. I mean, and you and I both in the US, we've seen the polarization of politics without taking sides. It's clear that there's two sides, and as we all like the side we're on. Honestly, I try to stay in the middle. It's hard to stay in the
Yeah.
middle, but it's very comforting to know that there's a clan of people that think the same way I do on this side and the same on this thing. It's tribal, it's inbuilt, it's part of our monkey mind that takes us down that path of feeling comfort from hearing other people share our views, and going and getting other views is uncomfortable. So we don't tend to do that. So it just drives us apart. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that's very well sketched. I think that describes sort of the mechanics of sort of how we wound up here and why we find it such a difficult process to extricate ourselves
Yeah.
from this, because it's just it's operating at such a fundamental
It
level
is.
that is
It
tough
is
to
a very,
override.
it is, isn't it? And I think, as we go into AI, and we should probably come back to some of the practical
Yeah.
implementations, but as we go into AI, I think it's not human. Someone said this to me the other day, and I did a short segment on it. An AI is not a person. An AI is a tool. And it's a very, very powerful tool. And maybe it's more than a tool, or you can frame it otherwise, but it's definitely not a human. And I can think of some really good examples. You can't send an AI to jail. There's no accountability, right? You can't fine them, you can't punish them, but you also, you can't really reward them. So that it doesn't have that. Not out in the physical world here either, and an instance in AI is just an instance. It literally, the word instance says it's there and it's gone. I mean, it's hard to have any kind of yeah, accountability. I'm repeating that word, but any kind of accountability that a human has. We have long-term accountability. We have social connections. We have trust. We have a career. We have, all these things that we build up to. Um, AI has none of those. You can't swap out the two.
No, absolutely not. And it's interesting too that there's a big question, as we look at kind of the societal level of that everybody I think has thought about, and it's probably maybe lost a few hours of sleep over, is thinking about like, well, where do humans fit in this future that's kind of unfolding rapidly and in totally indiscernible fashion. And I actually think that sort of that accountability, and the ability to be culpable will end up in some way, some shape or form, end up being humans' moat a little bit. I
Hmm.
think in all this,
Yeah.
that it's like that at the end of the day, you do need someone who can be held accountable, against whatever happens. And when you have a machine that is, that's probabilistic in nature and is phenomenologically inert, it's like you can't hold that accountable.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yep.
so there's something in there. Yeah.
I think that's the issue I think we're having with the self-driving cars is it's not that it can't be done, and I believe it in certain circumstances. I had a podcast guest on who was very, very close to this. Like he's been 30 years in camera development. He said out on the highway, a car that's auto driving, with AI, is safer than a human. That's statistically proven. He said if you could replace every car with the best AI, we would drop thousands of deaths on the road every year. But you can't get around the legal issues, right? Who's accountable for driving the car? Is it the instance? Is it the owner who was asleep, or is it the person who is it the engineer working for one of the companies, or is it the company itself? I mean, it's now, currently, if I make an error in the road and I pay the price for it, whether it's a fine or worse, I'm accountable. The real world has accountabilities. AI seems to skip over all that.
Yeah, and it's that example you gave is quite interesting in that it struck me how having a human operator, it collapses all the accountability and culpability down to like a discrete understandable like entity in one point in that entire chain of like of the car's existence and in the other people that say were injured. But in the case when the human is taken away from it, all that responsibility diffuses sort of ambiguously, that
Mm,
there's no obvious node in the chain where it can be applied anymore.
mm, mm.
And so yeah, it's unclear what to do about that, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
just an interesting point. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to some of your stuff. So you
Yeah.
are you still based out in California?
I'm in Minneapolis
Okay.
now. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But you were in California, as you said, you were part of the startup world for 12 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I had I started out in California in 2014, went to New York, I lived there for eight
Hmm.
years,
Hmm.
and then was part of then sort of like the last sort of like W-2 type work that I did was with a startup out of San Francisco, and at
W-2,
the
that's for overseas people, that's full-time staff employment.
yes, yes, exactly, yeah, precisely, yeah, where
Took
I
me
was
about three
working.
years after I moved here before I figured that
Yeah,
out.
so yeah, I have to be careful with my legal nomenclature that throw around. But yes, that exactly. Yeah, when I was working for someone, that was out in San Francisco, and it was after that that I went and started Nuvocode. And yeah, so but that's really it was all for the most part, all that time was really in the startup space, and it was really kind of a blessing, I think, to be in that world because it was just certainly during that time period and still is. There's such a premium on being moving quickly, doing so with craft. It's kind of like a nice marrying of a quick delivery, but alongside it's on the rails of like high standards and sort of a technical excellence, I guess we can say.
Yep.
So that set a really good foundation, I think, for coming into this world of
Yep.
AI, where that development, now that it can be done so quickly and you can do so much with it, that when it rests on sort of I think that fundamental understanding of sort of the sort of like the way how to do software well and the sort of the scope
So,
of
so you
concerns.
are you are a trained software engineer, software developer, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you must have seen some radical changes over the last few years, right? From pre-AI, which is I guess before 2022, even though I've been in AI since 2016, but on more the deterministic vision system sides of things. But when the LLM started to come in 2022, and now it's happened in the last couple of years, things have really shifted in the software world. What have you witnessed, Joe?
Oh gosh, yeah, where to begin? I guess well, obviously, so my work, just starting with my own workflow, has changed um, absolutely dramatically. I mean, I think from back in 2023, I was using sort of there was like a nice tabbed autocomplete that was powered by like a GitHub Copilot.
Yep.
inside the IDE that I was using when that and that was like that made so many things so much more tractable and was in and of itself a an incredible speed and productivity boost. But now looking back on that, that's nothing when you compare it to the world of say
So
Claude
that
Code.
little thing, if people
Yeah.
aren't software developers, if you and I did some software, I never sort of expanded that side of things. I went to other areas. But what I think one of the things that makes software hard is you have to get the syntax right. In fact,
Yes.
I went right back to the days when we were writing an assembler code, and every single, register change had to be described with exact syntax. If you made the slightest error, spelling error or punctuation error, the whole thing wouldn't work. It'd be full of bugs. The autocomplete really helped that, right? So that was a big step forward.
It's huge. I mean, I think myself and every software engineer has memories of many days spent where you're staring at a terminal screen, trying, and something uh, is broke. It will not compile, and you have tried every last thing you can possibly find. You're searching through Stack Overflow, endlessly, and it might take a day or more, to sort of fix this one thing. And it turned out that it was that you had a comma or so, perhaps where there was supposed to be a period,
Yeah.
or you had
Yeah.
misnamed a variable, and
Yep.
or just a certain like language a convention to the piece of software you're using that was kind of it was in documentation but maybe not perfectly explicated. It's just
Yep.
little things like that, and any number of those things could break it. And you're exactly right. Virtually all that is gone. It
Mm.
is removed by AI, and now it's a whole. Now I think people perhaps made the conclusion that all problems in software development become abstracted away and solved by AI, which is not true. But it just means that there's other new, more sort of like deep and architectural and sort of system design type problems that need to be thought about and solved
Right.
more.
So as
Yeah.
I mean, I've done this myself, and I guess a lot of our audience will have too. Just ask Claude or even ChatGPT to do something for you. I have this example where Wheel of Fortune game, I was on a networking thing, and the guy started this Wheel of Fortune game, which is where you guess the phrase by picking the letters, and you get so
Mhm.
many vowels and consonants and so on. He started the game, and I thought, well, I'll write the code as he's doing that. I had the code written, tested, deployed on my computer before he finished the game, and which is like 3 or 4 minutes. And I didn't write a single line of code. Admittedly, it was all in HTML. It wasn't on a server or anything like that. It wasn't very
Yeah.
sophisticated, but I think to me it demonstrated the power and speed of something. Now, to write that would have taken me days, probably even longer, because I'm not familiar with a code anymore. But I could describe it well enough and tune it well enough to get a result really quickly. So are you agreeing with me that perhaps those simple kind of things like that AI is really good at, but then you alluded to some areas that, AI is not good at in the software development world. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I would definitely agree with that. Simple things, demos, even I would say even things that maybe in a lot of ways aren't so simple. I've been um, impressed with Claude's ability to tackle so sort of what they call like one-shot um, projects or first versions of things that when they are sufficiently well described and specced out that it can get quite far, with reasonably like it's not just a simple to-do app, I guess is what I'm
What's that?
saying.
What's a one-shot project?
A one shot is where you give it just a one simple instruction and then it spits it out and it's correct. It works. It does
Oh,
everything. You didn't have to correct it. There was no bug fixing. There was no anything else. It was just
one
one,
prompt,
you give it one
effectively.
command, one prompt, and that was it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that can happen and has certainly happened. And I think the more well-defined the spec is, the more likely and the further you can go with that. That being said, there are more complex workflows. There are things that can only be defined and described through a process of, say, like engaging with an end user, and understanding sort of if they have a workflow that they do that is totally broken or inefficient and touches five different systems, and you want to bring that all into one
Right.
place. You it's you're going to have you're going to have an unsuccessful experience if you try to go off the top of your head and think about how that user could or should use your solution. They're the only way to arrive at a good place is through this sort of iterative back and forth, and in a lot of cases that is going to lead to a level of sort of like complexity either the server and the data side of things, or even in the user interface that is that is going to be beyond what an LLM can just, kind of churn out.
Mm.
And it's still, I would still say that there's left to its own devices, there's still code quality issues. It's certainly getting better, but if you want to ensure that certain design patterns in the code are enforced, a lot of that still requires a lot of sort of upfront awareness and sort of top-down management through your own
Oh,
attention,
okay.
through rules that you can establish for, for an IDE, but things of that nature. So that's kind of what I think the landscape sort of looks like right now in that regard.
Yeah, I think I wrote down a couple of things as we went through. So you mentioned, I guess, I don't know whether you use these exact word. Yes, you did. You use exact word multiple systems. So
Mhm.
I certainly use multiple systems. I have three screens here and I'm running between apps all the time. Now, some of that could be coded up, I guess, but then there was this unstructured workflows. I would say, I think you said it, I don't know whether you said exactly those words, but that's what I picked up. An
Mhm.
unstructured workflow is something that you can't necessarily describe. Like if I was to get someone to follow me around for a day, they could say, "Oh, these things are structured." But Pete, all this stuff over here, I can't seem to find the structure in that. I think
Yeah.
it would, and I think that's the piece where AI is going to really struggle. If you can't structure it and write it down, and it's okay, this is step A, B, C, D, or whatever. AI can't come in and help you, right? And a lot of
No,
people who work in the real world, they have a lot of this unstructured elements to their work.
yeah, and that's, it kind of goes back to your what we were talking about earlier with sort of the nature of hallucinations and the probabilistic nature of LLMs, in that it's like if you leave open space for it, space that's not well defined
Mm,
and everything, it's going to come up with its best guess about what that ought to be. And if you haven't defined that space well, not only is the guess probably going to feel wrong to you, but you might, in all likelihood, not even have a clear idea of what right is. You only
right.
know it's right because whenever you happen to do it, you have a particular goal in mind, and then you can say, okay, well, that's good enough.
Yes.
But that is a core issue there, that it's the success of automating with AI, and this goes back to that AI readiness thing, is that you in that business process mapping, is that part of that is that you are defining clear endpoints, clear goals, and then just you're really structuring or maybe destructuring down to its fundamental roots those workflows. And if you can't do that, that's a first step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a little example that I think might illustrate this to the audience is if you go to say Chat GPT and you get it to do something complex, say you know, help me define, through all these documents, help me write an email or something. And then you go and read it and you go, it's not good enough. And you go back and you can literally say to it, it's not good enough. You've missed some things. Try again. And it will literally try again and it'll do a better job the second time. And you think, well, why didn't it do that the first time? Why didn't it actually give me the better result the first time? And I think some people have been pointing that out to me, and I've been testing that with this, and I'm just fascinated that if I'm more demanding towards it, it seems to step up. It doesn't automatically step up. And so back to your point about the outcomes, you, I need to know if I'm sending an email, I need to know the standards that I'm setting. And sometimes they can be very low because I'm just a casual email to a friend, and sometimes they're very high because there's a high stakes negotiation, and I'm going to have to gauge, where I sit on that consequences thing, right? And I think that's again where the human comes back in, understands the consequences of the situation that I'm in as a human, and can then steer it to um, towards the outcomes in the context of the real world, not in the context of the AI chat, which because it's very limited. It only has a limited amount of memory, a limited amount of scope to which what it can operate in. I guess if I was expanding on that idea, imagine I had a portal here. I had somebody, a super smart person, just through that window there, but I only gave them a little bits and pieces of information, and they came back with me with the best that they could. They couldn't really understand what I'm dealing with over here, right? What is happening because the context is so much broader. It would take me a long time to get there. They'd literally have to follow me around to see and live my world. I mean, I've worked with business partners, and that can be really helpful, but there's still it's a little bit like the analogy of the boxer in the ring is the one that really feels the punches and really knows how tired and how they feel and whether they can win or lose the fight. Everybody in the audience has their opinion, but not one of them is in the ring feeling it. And I think this is again, it's this abstract, there's just this abstraction that comes with AI, and you can't sort of just pull them in. I hope I didn't go too far off track, but
No, no, no. But I think that, I mean, this is a very good distinction to draw because it's like a lot of times we talk about the limitations of LLMs or AI and everything, and there's a lot to be said about that. But I think the sort of the analogy of like the very intelligent person on the other side of a window that you have to manually pass context to, I think reframes a lot of those limitations as realizing that it's like that it's yes, there's things that are relevant to AI specifically, but a lot of it is this challenge of sort of like total global holistic context transfer to another entity, whatever that entity may be. Because we see that challenge in our daily work when we have to try to kind of sync between teams, between marketing and sales, between sales and engineering, trying to get everybody talking the same language and pushing towards the same goal is kind of another version of that same
yeah,
problem.
yeah. Well, do you have any advice for companies that are looking to adopt AI?
I do. The first thing is to recognize is that quick, easy, try to like quick hits, just simple chat bots, just buying everyone a Copilot seat. Those things are not likely to deliver the kind of ROI that you're hoping for.
Hmm.
Two is to probably think big about the what you hope to achieve with AI automation.
Mm.
Assume that what is possible is maybe larger than you think it is. So kind of just even as like a thought, generation sort of tool, think in those terms.
Hmm.
Three is to then, start on these today because the reality is, there's a whole sort of a preamble of like planning and of that all that AI readiness we talked about. It cannot be done quickly. It cannot be done in a quarter. It'll probably take multiple quarters of time. It will probably, in all likelihood, depending on what scale of company you happen to be and the talent you have in your team, you might need outside resources. You might need to develop
Hmm.
skill sets or hire outside help just to get your mind wrapped around this. So you want to begin sooner rather than later. Um, and I guess, would there be anything else? I guess from that point, then it's like just try to um, try to ensure that sort of if you are doing anything that's mission critical with it, ensure that you're building in verifiability, auditability, or explainability as a first class design principle into your systems because this gets to really like sort of the core of how you actually get ROI from AI. If you have to go back and check everything it does, even if it's 99.999% correct, if you are in a 100% type of business, all that means is that you still have to go back and check everything because one error can cost you dearly. So the way you solve this is by building in that ability to understand exactly what the AI did and what data it used at every step in the chain, be able to inspect that very quickly in sort of the human operator's interface and everything, so they don't have to go and look in five different systems to check something because that's where the value falls apart.
Yeah.
Being able to do that quickly is where you can collapse that time down to where you
Yeah.
actually get value. Yeah.
So, I mean, you said start today. What compels a business to start today? Why do they need to start today?
Because if you look at some of the big players, companies with real scale, yeah, you can whether you see this in case studies or even conversations I've had with friends that are at Fortune 5 type companies and up in leadership, and they're all talking. They all have big initiatives going on. They're going top down, not bottom up. They're all talking in terms about they're talking about AI readiness. They're talking about business process mapping. They're talking about AI governance, and they're talking about how this is going to lead to not just the augmentation of workflows, but the total transformation of and in sort of reimagining of what even workflows exist and how they look. The biggest players are doing this, and they have the resources to pull it off on a shorter time scale than most.
Mm.
So whatever industry you happen to be in, there's going to be a gap that opens up very, very quickly between you and them. And I think,
Right.
I predict that it's going to be all too easy to look very legacy, very archaic, very dinosaur in a much shorter period of time than most people think. And because you can't move faster than is really possible in all this, you need to be moving today because if you find yourself behind, panicking is not going to get you there faster. You're going to have to move at the same speed anyways. There's not
Right.
going to be any accelerating of it. Yeah.
So I suppose those companies that are most vulnerable are those that are operating in a sphere where the bigger companies could come and overrun them, right?
Yeah.
Oh no, as they push themselves down. Um, I can think of the counter example. I can't think of.
Mhm.
Well, actually, I can think of. Perhaps it's the big bookkeeping and the accounting and that sort of thing, where these big companies have been used to operating, with the corporates. Now they can find with AI, they can operate so much more cheaply. They can offer service offerings further down, and that's going to
Mhm.
come and effectively eat the lunch of the smaller companies because these guys are so far ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly correct. It's making, I think, wider segments of the market, more accessible. And it's an interesting, it's a bit of a barbell thing that I see going on here, that it's the probably the companies that seem most well positioned to take advantage of the current era are, yeah, like the big operators that are well resourced. Typically we think of them as moving slower, and in a lot of ways they still do, but
Mm.
they they are plugged in enough to recognize the challenge, and they are able to dedicate resources. On the
Yep.
other end, there are sort of very small but very tech forward companies. There's some great folks I talked to that are small operators in the data unification territory, but they're selling a product. Um, which essentially that solves one layer of that AI readiness conversation, and
Yep.
they're doing great. But everybody kind of in the middle, and especially if there is not a really tech forward sort of philosophy and everything, those are probably the most in danger because they don't move that fast, and they don't have the technological positioning to sort of like challenge up market or move down market.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. So, any particular industries you think are the first to be affected by the move to AI?
It's a great question. I mean, everybody's kind of getting it at once. I mean, because everybody's pursuing it so assiduously. However, I think that where we've seen a little bit of initially maybe a little bit of being slow out the gates in the areas of say finance, accounting, I actually think that there's going to be some pretty big breakthroughs there pretty soon because the everybody's speaking the language that I see is now speaking the language of like, AI governance and auditability and these things. And it's only a matter of time before the understanding of how to distill that down into system design happens. I don't think it'll be more than another quarter or two. And once that happens, I think it's going to be like that. There's going to be a lot of racing ahead. Because there's a lot of decision making that can be improved, whether it's loan approvals or like fraud detection, sort of market insights and investment recommendations. That when you have a strong system of auditability and verifiability behind it, are now just there's incredible value that's to be there, and the payoff is ends up being obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. So We're running out of time here, Joe, and we could go deeper, and I could talk all day about this. It's such an interesting, fascinating topic and developing fast. Do you have any questions for me or anything you want to talk about that we haven't already?
Gosh, I mean, I'm always just kind of curious to hear where, because I come from I'm steeped in the technological side of things, and I find that I often misapply my own sort of understanding of the space and where things seem from at least sort of an overly technologized sort of perspective. And I guess just kind of like, sort of like from where you sit, I guess, like, what do you seem to find to be like sort of like the dominant conversations or more perhaps even some of the more interesting wrinkles around AI that people you talk to are happen to be saying.
Yeah, I think there's been a realization that that there has been a little bit of overreaching of what AI can do. And that's driven by a narrative from the big players, right? They want to get subscribers, they want to get people on. And I would call that the consumer retail, like using the LLMs on a day-to-day basis. I consider that to be sort of retail consumer. Um, where it hasn't really had the impact that I think it will, and it's coming now, is in its ability to change businesses and change the way businesses operate. And I think that it's taking that glowing vision of what it could be, and then a big reality check on what it really can do. So we're going to have this. I think we're going for it right now. There's this reset. Okay, there's the vision, but really, what you can do is down here. Now everyone's starting to work down here, and we're starting to see people really having an impact. Some of the stuff we've done has had an impact on businesses, and now it's starting to get real, meaningful um, use cases that are really affecting companies on a day-to-day basis. That's kind of the macro view that I've got. I mean, of course, there's a lot of stuff going on, and the race. I guess we've got the model races, between the big models, and will there be one? Will there be two? Will there be only one? I mean, gosh, they're racing like crazy, and of course, we benefit from that because we get, I guess, subsidized access to these powerful models, which is primarily propped up um, by the investors as they race to own the market.
Mhm.
And then, of course, I think we're starting to see things heading us like high power prices, high costs of hardware. I heard that what was this Steam machine is a new AI, not AI, it's a new game console. It's almost 50% higher price than was expected because they can't get access to the GPUs at the prices that you could a few years back. So we're starting to see some really big macro effects um, that are affecting us in, I guess that's a small way, but I think it's going to be quite pervasive. Yeah.
Yeah, that I think is the looming conversation. I think everybody knows is coming, but I think maybe the scale is yet unappreciated, and I think it's completely unclear to me where that's going to lead, but I think it's going to be important.
Yeah. Well, Joe, one more question for you. AI, is it hype or help?
Simple answer, it's a help. The nuanced answer is I think in at the hangover from the early AI hype era kind of has set in, and I think that's
Hmm.
led people to erroneously conclude that it was just hype. But I think as kind of we've kind of gone into in our discussion, I think that the reality is that it's definitely a help,
Yeah.
and that it's going to be revealed to exactly how that plays out, more and more, over the next year or so.
Well, this has been a real pleasure, Joe. Stick around after the podcast. I want to talk to you a little bit. We'll have to have you back on because I think we've got more to explore. But thanks very much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure, Pete. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks. Well, that was fascinating talking to Joe. He had lots of insights about how to implement AI into businesses. He comes from the software world and he's adapted his business to AI implementations. One of the key areas that we noted was the need for smaller businesses to act now and not become dinosaurs. And this is because the bigger companies are investing very heavily in AI, and the trickle down effect is going to displace many small businesses who cannot compete. So move with the times and act now. The second thing is we rolled out a bunch of actual tips specifically for small businesses, and one I'll leave you with here is if you think that rolling out a chat across your organization is going to work and give you a return on investment, you're probably going to be disappointed. And then we talked about some of the metrics like data hygiene, data uniformity, and those sorts of things that are needed to be set up early on when you roll out an AI implementation. Well, if you want to know more about Joe and his business, follow the links in the description. If you want to know more about Skillin and what we do, do the same. I hope that helps, and thanks for watching.